story begins right here in Bethesda, Maryland. Let's go back 20 years to Thanksgiving weekend. I'm 9 years old and a fourth grader at Bannockburn Elementary School. That weekend, I was so excited about turkey, spending time with my family, and most importantly, no school. That Saturday was my dad's birthday, November 28th, and I don't know about you, but I've always loved birthdays. And the next day, Sunday, was this seemingly ordinary Sunday, and I thought I'd be going back to school after a long weekend at home. My mom had to travel for a business trip, so I knew I would miss her, so a couple of my siblings, Peter and Melissa and I, thought that we would go say our goodbyes to her off at Dulles Airport. And we did that. But on the way home, something happened. My dad lost control of the car, and the next thing I knew, he had floored it on the gas pedal, and we shot across this empty highway. That scene ended pretty abruptly. When I woke up, I was laying down, and it must have been really late because I was so tired. But there was this man hovering over me, and he kept forcing my eyelids open. And as I came to my senses a little bit more, I realized that I was in this helicopter ambulance on my way to the hospital. And that man hovering over me was a medical professional who thought that perhaps the last time I closed my eyes would be the last. So it turns out I didn't make it back to school the next day, or for a little while. I ended up spending 3 weeks in Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C., and I broke a couple bones in my leg, so I was in a wheelchair for a few months. And I stretched the nerves in my right arm, the brachial plexus, which is an injury that is still with me to this day. So I have a little bit of a funny hand. But this isn't just a story about a couple broken bones or a nerve injury. Not everyone made it out of that car accident alive. My dad didn't make it. And so when I think back about that weekend, I thought it was supposed to be about family and gratitude and abundance and celebration of life. But now it was about loss. So after about 4 months, the bones in my leg had healed and I was walking again. I had relearned how to write with my left hand. I used to be right-handed. And I went back to school. And I was thrust into this environment where I was still grieving over the loss of my dad. I don't think losing a parent is easy at any age. And dealing with my new identity as a person with a disability. My arm would rest in this navy blue sling that was a reminder, this symbol to me that I was different, that things were different. One of my least favorite memories growing up was this mandatory physical education class. I'd always hated PE, but now it was worse. I remember I'd stand there as it was time for the team captains, my classmates, to pick their teams, and I'd watch as my classmates would leave my side on my left and my right to go to their respective teams. And I was always left standing on my own. No one wanted me to be on their team. I was always the last kid picked. And it doesn't matter if you have a disability or not, but things like that, not being picked for a team every single day, can have lasting impacts on how we feel like we can contribute to society. So I sat on the sidelines of the gym, and I sat on the sidelines of life. I just hid. I was so ashamed and embarrassed about my arm. I wore long sleeves all the time, and those of you from the DC area know summer in DC with long sleeves is pretty unbearable, not something I would wish on to anyone. And if you asked me about my arm, I would just start crying. I wouldn't give you an opportunity to get to know me and to get to know my story. And that was my situation growing up. I blocked everyone out. I was this 9-year-old girl who was just so angry. I was so angry at my dad that he created this new reality for me, and I was so angry and I was at war with myself and my body because I didn't want to deal with this. I wanted more than anything for things just to go back to the way they were. My mom, who was now a newly single parent, had to raise 4 kids on her own, and she did everything she could to make sure that we never had to worry about having a roof over our head or food on the table. But she worked so hard that it also meant that she was never home. And so I didn't get the support that I needed. And at school, gym class was this daily torture. I'd get dressed for this class every single day that no one wanted me to be at. At school, I felt excluded, and at home I felt so isolated. It's one thing to lose a parent, and it's another thing to acquire a disability, but it's a third thing to feel so isolated and alone. And the hardest part of all of this, it wasn't losing my dad, and it isn't having a disability, it's how I was treated in the years that followed. Chronic exclusion, repeated exclusion, creates irreversible trauma. And it's not the kind of thing you just get over as you get older, nor does it disappear over time. Time doesn't heal all wounds. It took me 12 years before I spoke publicly about the car accident and what had happened to me. And that's 12 years of shame that 2 decades later, I'm still working to explore and heal. So what happened? I'd always noticed that people seemed pretty uncomfortable with disability. And as a result, they were uncomfortable with me. And all I really wanted was to be liked, to be accepted, to be understood. The truth is we don't really understand disability, so we don't know how to talk about it. We're so afraid of saying something offensive or not politically correct that we end up saying nothing at all. And because of that, we rely on stereotypes in the media, which oftentimes portray disability as a medical diagnosis, a tragedy, or a charity case, which is very much rooted in pity and how I saw my own story, or as a function of our external social environment and attitudes. But the problem with these mindsets is that they're rooted in assumptions that people with disabilities can't achieve and can't dream, and because of that, we're not even given the chance to succeed. And we start to believe that for ourselves. We see the disability and we judge the ability. But the thing is, no one asked me how I wanted to be viewed. What happens when we look at disability as identity, as part of the fabric of who we are? And similar to other aspects of identity, it can be rooted in pride and empowerment. There's no pity, there's no victimization, there's no shame. Something that I thought about every single day, my funny arm, no one was talking about and no one was acknowledging. And when you don't talk about or acknowledge part of my identity, I, as a whole, feel invalidated, insignificant, invisible. We can only compartmentalize who we are so much. I'd always noticed the stares, but I felt like no one was really looking at me. There are over 1 billion people in the world who live with a disability. That's a lot of people who feel forgotten, overlooked, invisible. What does it mean to be excluded? In the identities that I represent, it means feeling like a burden, which is one of the most dangerous things that anyone can ever feel. It means feeling like you don't belong, and it means feeling like you have to ask for permission just to show up. So my experiences have made me really passionate about inclusion and empowerment. I never wanted anyone who met me or touched my work to feel like they were alone. And I never wanted anyone to feel like they didn't matter. So what does that look like? It's rooted in community. And I've been building communities everywhere that I go because there's something so powerful about community. As a function of community, you feel connected, you feel like you belong, and you feel empowered. And empowerment can come in a lot of different ways. It can come from having your basic needs met, like food on the table or a roof over your head, like my mom did for me. But sometimes there are a couple more things that are needed for that equation, like being gainfully employed or feeling valued at work or feeling independent and self-reliant. And it can come from feeling like you have people who are rooting for you, who support you, who challenge you, who lift you up. People who see you for your potential. What a powerful thing to be surrounded by. So what are the elements that will comprise this new world? It starts with celebrating our shared humanity, recognizing that we all have diverse lived experiences to bring to the table that are just waiting to be shared, fostering this sense of belonging and seeing people for the gifts they have to impart on the world. All of us just want to be seen, and we want to be heard, and we want to be valued. If we come back to grounding ourselves in our humanity, we'll realize that we're all the same. We're all the same in this desire for human connection. And so I look back at my story, and I don't think that it was a story about loss. I think it was about everything that I gained. And I don't think that this was a story about overcoming, but becoming. And so 20 years ago, the universe picked me to make it out of that car accident alive and do something with my one life. And growing up, my classmates picked me, and sometimes they didn't. But this time, it's my turn to pick. And I want to pick each and every one of you to be on my team.